Hello and welcome to Harry Cole Saves the West, the show where American grit meets British backbone. Tonight, the story that just won't go away. Democrats have unleashed a new batch of explosive emails from Jeffrey Epstein's estate, claiming that Donald Trump knew about the girls. One suggests Trump spent hours with a victim. Another written by Epstein saying, "I know how dirty Donald is." Now, the White House is saying tonight it's a political smear. They're saying the so-called unnamed victim mentioned in the email is actually Virginia Giuffre, the same woman at the centre of the Prince Andrew scandal and who was on the record before her death saying President Trump had done nothing wrong. So what's going on? Is it evidence? Is it corroboration? Or is it just some conveniently timed links with lots of redactions? Joining us down the line is Christina Bobb, former Trump lawyer and former prosecutor. Good evening, Christina. Welcome back to the show. White House is determined to say this is a nothing burger and doesn't prove anything. Dems getting very excited, but this story just won't go away for the White House, will it?
Yeah, no, this one is lingering, and I think it's going to linger until we get some more information. I think this is something Americans actually care about because they want to make sure that our leaders aren't contributing to this type of problem with potential child trafficking or inappropriate relationships with children. Certainly, any American on either side wants to make sure that that's the case. So I think it's probably going to linger until we get a little bit more information. And I would agree with Caroline Levitt. I don't think these emails particularly say anything salacious. There's certainly no hints of illegal activity by Donald Trump. A lot of the information is information that already came out. But I don't think they're doing themselves many favors by continuing to keep the information concealed.
Is it time now just for the White House? I know they've been resisting it. I know there's efforts tonight to try and stop a House vote to publish the full files. That would then have to go through way through the Senate, which is not necessarily clear it would do. And then obviously the White House, the president could veto such a move. That would be a politically contentious moment. It'd be sort of all the Democrats' Christmases coming at once if he was to actively step in to stop the publication. But haven't we just reached the point now where, how bad can it be if the White House are confident that President Trump has done nothing wrong? Just get it all out.
Right. And I don't think President Trump has done anything wrong. I don't think they're protecting Donald Trump. I mean, certainly if there was really salacious, dirty information on him, it would have come out, over the last 8 years while they were trying to prosecute him and throw him in prison and impeach him. I mean, if it existed, I think we would have seen it by now. So I don't know what their end game is with it. I do think it would be better to release it than keep it hidden for whoever they're protecting. And I suspect it's people on both sides of the aisle. This is unfortunately not a partisan issue. I think there's probably bad actors on both sides. So I don't know what their end game is, but I'd like to see it come out. But I do believe that they're considering, you have to be really careful about how you release this types of information because it can harm innocent people. And so you want to make sure that all of the victims are safe and that anybody who, someone delivering mail who happened to be seen there, isn't caught up in this type of salacious allegations unfairly. So there's a lot of considerations going into how that information is redacted, how it's released. And so it's a sticky problem.
Today proves, though, the sort of political power of the redaction, doesn't it? In that tranche of emails published by the Democrats on the Oversight Committee, they redacted Virginia Giuffre's name very deliberately, replacing it with the word victim. Yes, she was a victim of this scandal, no doubt about that. But she has been publicly identified by it before. It seems to me like with those redactions, they were suggesting or trying to suggest that this was trying to muddy the water in some aspects because Giuffre was very clear on the record. President Trump did nothing wrong in her view.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And so when you put that word victim on there in an email that's discussing Donald Trump, naturally it goes to muddy the water and lead people to believe that she's somehow a victim of Donald Trump, even though she herself has said she was not and she's not aware of anybody else who was. So it's a bit of gamesmanship. It makes for great TV. They can splash it up there and show, look, victim, Donald Trump, you should hate him, which is their goal. But it's not, I mean, none of this would be admissible in court. It's all hearsay. They can't be cross-examined, unfortunately, because several people on this chain are no longer with us.
No, exactly.
But so it's just a way to create a story in the media that doesn't have any real legal teeth. But that's what this is. It's a media show, right? It's all for show.
Exactly. I mean, how does this play out, though? Obviously, this has been months and months and months of this. What is the time frame for the next tranches of documents? And what I found fascinating, really, looking at some of that, was just how far Jeffrey Epstein's network went, really. We knew about his relationship with Peter Mandelson. We knew about his relationship with Prince Andrew, well, the Andrew formerly known as Prince, now Andrew Windsor, Mountbatten Windsor, Mr. Plain Old Andrew. But when you see journalists like Michael Wolff openly colluding with Jeffrey Epstein post-jail to try to dig up as much dirt as possible on Donald Trump in the run-up to the 2016 elections. The Democrats don't necessarily helping themselves with some of the emails they put out today, because all those people that said there was this big media and Democrat conspiracy to stop Trump, it's there in black and white.
Right. I mean, that's exactly what it is. Michael Wolff built his career on creating basically fake, salacious cases against presidents and ruining careers kind of artificially, if I can say that. He's been discredited many times. So they're basically proving their own point that you get a reporter who, if you can call him that, or an author, who has a history of creating kind of fake scandals against politicians he doesn't like. And he's largely the basis in these emails, helping concoct a story with Jeffrey Epstein. And I do think it's worth noting that he does not accuse Donald Trump of any criminal activity. The worst thing he could find, or the worst thing that he mentioned in the email, was simply that Donald Trump was with Jeffrey Epstein, that they had a relationship, which we all knew, we've all known for years. So, the reporter who's known for creating scandal is proven in these emails to be part of creating the scandal, and even what he's creating is not all that.
What the president might call fake news. Christina, stay there. I'm going to bring in my colleague, Times of London, Washington editor, Katie Balls. Good evening, Katie. Talk us through the politics of this. How bad is this for the White House? Obviously, Caroline Leavitt did a briefing at the White House earlier today. Obviously, she was asked about it, but she came out pretty swinging, right? How's this vote looking, and is it going to pass?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can see the White House on the defensive. Of course, they have been quite quick to say this is all political blows and none of this really matters because the Democrats don't want to talk about the shutdown. But I think even if, the Democrats in turn also accusing the Republicans of, just making this about politics. But of course, I think if you just take away from that, the question is there any new information that's coming out which is going to be particularly bad for Donald Trump, the Republican Party, or other figures, in those documents? And so far, obviously, the most difficult thing for Donald Trump is this sense from an Epstein email saying that Donald Trump spent time with one of the victims, as you've been discussing. Other than that, there's not too much changing, and the White House is very much sticking to the line of, yes, they were friends. Donald Trump realized this guy was a creep, so he ended it. I think when it comes to the vote, they're clearly trying to stop it, and it just does add to this sense, which is what is tricky for Donald Trump and the Republican Party here, is they spent so long in that period, out of power before returning, and almost feeding the sense there was a big conspiracy, inviting influencers to the DOJ at one point to say they were going to release the files. But I think even from the MAGA base, there is an appetite for more transparency than there is right now.
Yeah, well, no, Donald Trump was the person that made this a thing. He made it, in every campaign stop for for his re-election. He was promising to release the files. Do you sense there's any sort of changing mood, Katie, from the White House of actually, if, as they say, he's done nothing wrong, as they say, the emails come out, and if there was a smoking gun, we probably would have known about it by now. Yes, some of it's a bit embarrassing, but in some of those emails, it appears that Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein have convinced themselves that Donald Trump, the dog that hadn't barked, was the reason that Trump's name was actually not mentioned by people, is because he was colluding with prosecutors and he's working with law enforcement against Jeffrey Epstein, a guy he's on the record from saying was a creep and he didn't like. Is there not an elegant pivot that they could get into and actually start to lean into this, and actually say, they're all very well screaming smear, but they could come out on the attack on this, couldn't they?
Yeah, they could potentially. And I also think, even if you look at the choreography today, which is this began with the Democrats on the committee ultimately releasing very specific information all about Donald Trump. The response of the Republicans was to then release 20,000 files, which we've all had to spend the day slightly digging through, which Steve Bannon might call flooding the zone. You know, so much information, what do you do? But certainly the response, I mean, we don't know if there were direct conversations with the White House on that or not, but that's the Republicans who'll want to be more helpful to Donald Trump than the Democrats, making the decision that actually more information is better in this instance. And perhaps we will get, you know, if this comes out and there isn't, an email that, you know, looks like it's about to bring the president down, maybe there will be an appetite for more information.
Christina Bobb, the DOJ are working with the House Oversight Committee. They are making stuff available. Clearly, there's a hell of a lot more to come. Are we going to see the ultimate release of the Epstein files, but just by sort of trickle by trickle, batch by batch, day by day, week by week? I mean, we're still going to be talking about this in 2028.
I actually think we will see as much as can legally be released. I do think it is trickle by trickle, unfortunately. But at the end of the day, I mean, this is a hot potato. It's been a hot potato for many administrations, going back at least to the Bush administration, you know, in Barack Obama. It's gone back and forth between Republicans and Democrats. This is not a party issue. And it's a hot potato that has just landed in Donald Trump's lap, along with all the Republicans who are in power right now. And they don't want to have anything to do with it. And I think Democrats are trying to get it out now before there's any type of power shift, whether it's in 2028 or beyond. And so they don't want to be the ones that inherit this hot potato, right? And so I think the Democrats are going to push hard to get it out now. I think ultimately it is in President Trump and the Republicans' best interest to get as much out as they can and take credit for releasing it, right? Democrats have had, you know, the whole Biden administration, two Barack Obama administrations, they never released anything. So I think this could be an opportunity for a win, but it looks to be a terrible situation for both parties, and Republicans are in power at the moment.
Having, you know, President Obama's White House counsel in 2014-15 still in direct touch with Jeffrey Epstein after he'd served, you know, a long friendship that's been exposed there. No one comes out of this exactly smelling of roses. Christina, you've defended President Trump over the years, and we'll discuss a little more on that in a moment. But just on that point there about what to expect in the run-up to the next year's midterms, the possibility of the Republicans losing the House, you know, if they lose control of the committees, we'll be back into sort of impeachment 2.0. More attempts to drag the president sort of, you know, out of office under the cloud of disgrace. Obviously, the Arctic frost investigation is still, you know, inquiry by oversight is still going on. There's lots to be done there. Donald Trump's suing the BBC. He's suing various other media outlets. He's fighting on a lot of fronts here. Is the White House tooled up enough, in your view, to be fighting pretty much on, you know, every front?
Well, I think they are fighting. The White House itself, I think, yes, I think they're doing everything they can. I think President Trump has done a good job of, you know, pulling his own weight on the things that he said he was going to do. Whether we're seeing that come out of the Department of Justice, like the agencies around the administration, there's probably a little bit more room for debate on that. Personally, I would like to see the Department of Justice be a little bit more aggressive, at least in investigations and exposing aspects of things. But the White House, you know, I think the White House is doing what the White House does. I think President Trump is doing his best to uphold his campaign promises, but he can't do it by himself. He can't do it without his agencies. And in a lot of ways, he can't do it without the House and the Senate. And the House and the Senate, which both are Republicans right now, haven't been pursuing his agenda. So
Katie Bowles, on that point, is Pam Bondi, you know, it's an unenviable task being Trump's top lawyer, right? It's never a dull day. We're seeing increasing sort of coverage, I should say denied on the record, but coverage by respected journalists nonetheless on tensions between the FBI director Kash Patel and Pam Bondi, tensions between Todd Blanche, who was one of Trump's former lawyers and now is number 2 at DOJ. Are they trying, you know, have they got bitten off more than they can chew? And is this going to, you know, where's this going to go? I mean, lawfare is certainly back on the agenda, right?
Yes, and look, Pam Bondi has so many tasks she's being asked to do. You also have, you know, the list of kind of enemies of Donald Trump where he wants justice served, you know, James Comey and others, that she's almost expected to run through. And there's been incidents where, you know, what appears to meant to be a DM from the president is actually a public tweet giving her orders.
I'm pretty sure that one was deliberate, right?
Yeah, well, there's mixed reports. But effectively, clearly she's under pressure to deliver a lot of those things. And also she is someone who's quite regularly criticised by parts of the MAGA fringes, particularly on Epstein. They think that she mishandled it in the beginning with that infamous interview where she said she had the client list on her desk, only to then say there's not a client list to release. So I think that, but Donald Trump routinely has spoke very positively of her. I think in that department, though, they are obviously going to be quite stretched in terms of how much they can do and how they can do it. And Trump and lawfare, I think, you speak to people around Trump, and one of the reasons he ran for president, yes, he wants to return, but he also thought if he didn't return, he would likely end up in jail and have multiple lawsuits.
Yeah, exactly.
So while he's got the power, he wants to do as much to put his own enemies back, because what happens, 2028 onwards?
It strikes me that there's a sort of core team in this administration. You have J.D. Vance, Marco Rubio, Scott Bessent, I'd say, was probably in there, and then the sort of outer ring of people, including sort of people like Kash Patel and Pam Bondi. That's where it seems to be a little bit more frayed. The White House obviously put a very protective arm around Kash Patel today, allowing him to come to the sort of press briefing and announce with much fanfare this deal with China over fentanyl. But more and more stories are appearing about people in the administration. For the first 10 months, actually, this has been kind of plain sailing. All the fire's been turned on the White House, really. But Kash Patel under fire from kind of his own side, really, using his private jet to ferry his girlfriend around to concerts and football games. Are we seeing a bit more scrutiny now?
Yeah, I think you could probably say that this administration, second term Trump, is probably ending its honeymoon period. Now, it might sound mad to call it a honeymoon period if you think about how much has happened, but I think there has been a sense in the first couple of months, you looked at that, very definitive result in the election, how it gave Trump so much authority, and then, as you say, in the first term, there was so much more infighting. So much of the coverage was about the splits, and the staff turnover was so much higher. Whereas now, I think, particularly with the elections last week, there's a little bit of a reality check coming. The fact that the Democrats had a really good set of results, the Republicans did not. You can say individual factors, but it does mean you now have some Republicans looking around and starting to say, hang on a minute, are we focused enough on domestic issues? Do we have the right people in position? Are some people being self-serving and almost playing into this idea the Democrats want to land, which is that Donald Trump and his team are partying and living in gold covered palaces, Great Gatsby parties.
To be fair to the guy, I'm exhausted just watching it. I'm keeping up with that daily schedule. That trip to Asia, the trips to the Middle East, the guy does work. Christina, just a final question while we've still got you. Talking of Donald Trump's influence and power, congratulations are in order for your pardon.
Well, thank you. It was certainly a nice gesture, and I appreciate Ed Martin, and I think Cleta Mitchell was involved, and the folks that really wanted to try to show support for a lot of President Trump supporters that we had kind of really been left by the wayside. I'm very grateful. My indictment had been thrown out 5 months ago, and it's just administratively waiting to kind of get dismissed. So I'm grateful that I don't have to actually use it. But yeah, I did make the list.
You say it's a nice gesture, but is there a bit of politics in there in terms of, as Katie was just saying there, the MAGA base has started to flex a little bit. They started to complain about the direction of travel of the administration. Influence have gone over the top for the first time in a long time to say, what's going on. Obviously, the Epstein files, has upset a fair few people. Pardoning yourself and figures like Rudy Giuliani, that was a gift to the supporters as much as the people involved, right?
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly what it was. I think people are, particularly the people who were very involved in 2020 and who were watching the 2020 election closely, love Rudy Giuliani. They love Mark Meadows and everybody that was involved there.
And they love Christina Bobb, surely.
And maybe, I hope so. I certainly hope so.
All right, listen, thank you for joining us tonight. And welcome, come back on the show. Katie's staying after the break, but we will be talking about chaos in Britain. Don't go away. Welcome back to Harry Cole Saves the West. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube. You won't miss a thing. Just search Harry Cole Saves the West. Click subscribe. Tonight, Britain's government is on life support. Sir Keir Starmer, the man who promised calm, has delivered chaos. Inside Downing Street, panic. Phones are off, curtains are drawn, the bunker door is firmly shut. And while Starmer's loyalists insist it's all nonsense, one look at the sad faces on his cabinet tell a different story. It's a party at war with itself and a leader who's looking increasingly like he's lost the room. But if Britain's grown-up government doesn't find some guts fast, Nigel Farage won't just be snapping at Keir Starmer's heels, he'll be measuring the curtains in number 10, while Labour is still trying to work out how to reboot the Wi-Fi. Still with me is the Times of London's Katie Bors. Hello, Katie. Back to our old stomping ground. Yep. We fled Britain to avoid. We were told that, there would be no news in Britain. It would be the end of 14 years of Tory chaos. The grown-ups were back in charge. Labour were going to be competent, calm, peaceful, quiet, and there wouldn't be any stories. So we both moved to America to chase our dreams and chase the news. And lo and behold, looking back from 4,500 miles away, it's a ginormous bin fire, isn't it?
Are you regretting your move?
Not yet, no.
Okay, you're not.
I haven't quite got FOMO yet. I mean, I feel, at some point, Britain does need to be governed by someone who isn't, incompetent.
Yeah. No, you're right. There was a sense that the adults were back in charge.
Yeah. Well, not least because they kept telling us it.
Yeah, and just from, obviously, I did 10 years in Westminster for The Spectator, and you, I think, did even longer in the lobby. But I think that there was always a sense, whenever you had someone tell you that adults were back in charge and the various iterations of Downing Street under the Tories, your heart would slightly sink. It never really seemed to mean much. And therefore, with this Labour government, I think there was just a sense that if you could just not be as incompetent as the Tory government by the end.
That's kind of how they got the majority, right?
Yeah.
It's like the Tories lost the election, Reform split the vote on the right, and everyone just said, look, right, fine, change.
Fine, you're not the Tories, and also you're not trying to sound too exciting. We think that you're sounding, you're not telling us all your plans, and they didn't tell the plans much at all, which is one of their problems.
Yeah.
But the tone was something, and then, they had some really bad things initially, but it really does feel like in the past 5 months, they've just really lost the ball in lots of ways. And I think one of the things I think is really bad for Keir Starmer was when I started to clock, and you start to work out how many people you still know in London in certain roles, and you realise how many of his long-standing aides have left in the past couple of months. And if they start to leave, and we both know this from covering, particularly under Boris Johnson, he had various different Downing Streets, and every time they come in and they say they're going to create a new, more effective adults back, etc. Downing Street. But the problem with often bringing the new blood into your team is they're not your long-standing supporters. They don't know you like your old trusted aides do.
And they haven't been in the bunkers. You haven't been, you haven't been taking the grenades and the bullets for, you haven't got the scars on your back in the same way. One thing, look, I remember when Starmer, they made a big kind of deal of him being this kind of boring, technocratic, managerial lawyer, rather than the bombast of Boris or Liz or Liz Truss or whoever it may be. But actually, the problem is that you do need to be nakedly political in that building. He's got Morgan McSweeney as chief of staff, who is that character. But it does seem to me that actually, in a little bit like the sort of Wizard of Oz, the curtain's pulled back, and at the end of the day, he actually is just a boring technocratic lawyer and not a politician. And actually, while that may have helped him get over the line into Downing Street, ever since then he's been drowning, not waving.
Yeah, and I think there's always a problem when you start to focus too much on an unelected advisor. Again, I find myself surprised by how many parallels I think there are between the Boris Johnson government and the Starmer government.
And the first Trump government as well, when the sort of Time magazine had Steve Bannon on the front page as the most powerful man in the world ? Arguably, the one thing that forced him out of the building when the boss saw that. You're right. We saw it with Dom Cummings and Morgan. So talk us through what's happened in the last couple of days. This this sort of botched rearguard action to try and flush out Wes Streeting, the health secretary, who denies completely that he was plotting. What's the latest cock-up?
So clearly in Downing Street and amongst Keir Starmer's inner circle, there's deep concern about the next couple of months. Most immediate being the budget later this month, which we know is going to be very painful, and we expect it to involve very large tax rises.
Again, breaking the manifesto, they said they wouldn't
exactly.
do. Yeah.
Potentially income tax, which would go directly against the manifesto promise, potentially going further more for the wealthy. There's a question of what that would do to the government's growth mission if you then drive away business or the wealthy from staying in the country. And then also potentially lifting the two-child benefit cap, which lots on the left of Labour want, but it was only a couple of months ago that we were told that the country could not afford this.
Yeah.
So you start to have a look as though you have a leader who's not really able to do what he wants, but is beholden to his party because he's worried about them, parts that he might have ignored previously, and also because the economy hasn't improved, and you can, Rachel Reeves will blame that on Donald Trump and tariffs, but we did know they were likely coming.
And also, how are you going to improve the economy by creating more red tape on businesses?
And speaking down, there's a whole litany of errors, so you can't blame it on one specific person. But I think, the Labour government is not completely without blame here for some of the mood music around the economy and the decisions they made. Now, they're clearly worried about the local elections next year, which we've heard a lot about as the crunch point.
The sort of the British equivalent of the midterms.
Exactly. Yeah. Which is always what, when you say crunch point, always be a bit suspicious. They often come and go. But that was meant to be the crunch point. Now, clearly, they think the November budget is going to be so painful.
Yeah.
They're a little bit worried that after that, Keir Starmer's position could be destabilised. So, some bright sparks in the new look number 10, which still has one of the old look, Morgan McSweeney, who you mentioned.
But a lot of old Blairites.
Exactly.
Blair veterans.
Someone has gone around, and there are accusations to who, basically saying, well, we think there's going to be potentially a challenge. It might be Wes Streeting. He's a bright, shining light of Labour.
Yeah.
He used to be one of the most trusted ministers by number 10. And just so you know, if it's Wes Streeting or anyone else, we're going to fight them, and the economy will tank if you try and push out Keir Starmer. So,
which is a Downing Street line. I mean, it is, the one thing that's stopping Britain from a debt crisis is Rachel Reeves says the Treasury and polling and various other number 10 sort of outriders. There is a sort of point to that, right? But I just don't understand how they ended up in a knife fight with Wes Streeting, who, frankly, yes, obviously you can see his ambition from space, but I don't think he was actually on manoeuvres, was he?
No, I mean, I think there was a point last week when I started getting messages from people back in London when Wes Streeting actually did a tweet about Mandani and his victory in the New York mayoral election, saying, oh, we can all learn from this and hope. And I did think it felt less sincere to members of the Labour left, given Wes Streeting's very much seen as being more in the centre and to the right. So people thought, oh, he's on manoeuvres. But it does not feel as though there is an imminent plot there. And instead...
a massive own goal, and they're the ones that... So Keir Starmer's night, I think he phoned Wes Streeting to say sorry about it. They're saying, oh, it wasn't a proactive briefing, it was responding from journalist questions. I would dispute that. If you look at who the journalists were that had those original clothes, they are very, very plugged into Starmer world. What is the... I mean, we love this stuff. We grind, chew over it all and pore over it. I mean, but the average punter down a dog and duck tonight, what are they going to be thinking? Like, who are these people?
I think it just looks chaotic and self-serving, right? Which is one of the problems the Tories had.
Yeah.
The sense that it became about psychodrama and infighting and not talking about the issues voters actually care about. Instead, talking about who's up, who's down.
Yeah.
Now, Downing Street having a point on the economy. If you get rid of Keir Starmer and you bring in a new candidate, it would likely to be to the left of Keir Starmer, given the membership get a say. The markets won't like that. We've seen when Rachel Reeves cried in the chamber once. The markets didn't like the idea she might go.
Spike in gilt prices, wasn't it?
But also, getting your MPs on side is not, to basically imply they're stupid and fiscally incontinent, and therefore they have to go and stand in a corner, in the naughty corner, and take what they're given ahead of a budget. They're going to have a hard time selling to their constituents.
To be fair, though, there are Labour MPs who are on the record who tweet things like, "Why do we have to repay our debts?" I mean, you kind of feel sorry for Rachel Reeves, the people she's dealing with. Katie, stay there. We're going to bring in Elizabeth Pipco. There's been lots of discussion over the years about, actually, over the last few months, two leaders that arrived in office at similar times on a similar mandate. With a similar cry out for change, similar issues to tackle on immigration and the economy. One is Donald J. Trump, and one is Sir Keir Starmer. Now, they have struck up an unlikely friendship, publicly at least, the liberal lawyer, human rights, lefty-loving Keir Starmer and, well, Donald Trump is Donald Trump. The unlikely couple. Former RNC spokesman Elizabeth Pipco Is it all it seems behind the scenes with Trump and Starmer? And if you were advising Keir Starmer, what leaf out of Donald Trump's book should the Prime Minister take?
First of all, thank you for having me.
Very
Look,
welcome.
I don't know if I would ever be advising him, just because, like you said, he and Donald Trump are polar opposite, and I would rather die than end up in England. No offense to anyone.
Well, I'm sure our viewers in Britain will appreciate that one.
I'm sure as well. But I do think it's a strange, like you said, it's a strange time considering two leaders coming up at the exact same time with a country dealing with the exact same problems, the exact same angry folks on both sides of the aisle, and seeing someone get elected and seeing it just not work time after time after time. I know a lot more about American politics than I do British, but I was in England a few weeks ago, and everyone that I spoke to, everybody left and right, seemed to dislike Starmer. And I think that's, pretty much a bad sign to begin with. But, for me, I watched him when Donald Trump came to England. I watched them when they stood side by side. That was the strongest I'd ever seen Starmer, ironically. But I would just say, strap on a pair, maybe. Be like Donald Trump. People do like it. They do. Well, even if they won't say it.
Yeah, I mean, Donald Trump's opinion poll ratings aren't great. His unpopularity rating is pretty high, but his unpopularity rating is high. His popularity rating is also kind of high. He knows what he's doing. He's going for his people, and the rest of them can go to hell, basically. Is Keir Starmer, you think, trying to be too many things to too many people? And actually, a bit of the Trump magic sauce is actually pick a side and stand up for them.
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, I've seen it happen with Democrats in the U.S. time and time again. They try to play, a tiny bit of both sides, so they actually get elected, and then they can't really answer to anybody, especially because those that are more far left, more radical, are the loudest. But usually that's who these politicians tend to actually disagree with deep down, and whose policies they actually can't make reality. And I think that doesn't just go for Democrats, it doesn't just go for the United States of America. That is seen all across the world. I mean, when you're talking about a country that's been around as long as, the UK has, when you're talking about a country that actually knows how to function and how to govern, you should not have these kinds of issues. You should not be, taken over by migrants, by far left radicals. I don't think that should happen based on how long you've been around compared to us still trying to figure it out over here on this side of the pond. And yet that's exactly what seems to happen time and time again. That's what it looks like, at least to us. And I think when you promise too many things to too many crazy people, you get in and you end up pleasing nobody.
Well, exactly. For a president that, Donald Trump looks through the world through ratings, really. He's a man born in business and TV. Keir Starmer's ratings are in, and they're not great. Some suggestions that behind the scenes that relationship isn't quite as strong as people say, and that the president has woken up to the fact that, Keir Starmer is a bit of a loser.
I mean, I think compared to Donald Trump, most leaders, especially in Europe, kind of are losers. I mean, Donald Trump knows who he is. He's very proud of who he is. He's proud to be the leader of the greatest country on the face of the earth. And I don't think he has a problem really with anybody. I just think he turns around and realizes that they, say a lot like they do to their voters. They say a lot to his face that ends up not being the reality when they turn their back and go home. So I think he's just kind of used to it at this point. But in all my years of being around him, which is nearly 10 at this point, I actually have never seen him have a bad relationship with anybody. I've seen a lot play out in the media, but when you actually are around him with most of these foreign leaders, they get along surprisingly well.
I think Angela Merkel and Theresa May, former Prime Minister of Britain and the former German Chancellor, might have recollections may vary on that one. I can remember reporting on many a testy diplomatic phone call with those guys. And I think he once threw a starburst at Angela Merkel at a G7 summit. The special relationship, we saw, as you said, Donald Trump lining up there with Sir Keir Starmer and the King. Just over a month ago, wasn't it? It feels like a lot longer than that. On the surface, the special relationship is strong. It's strong, it's deep. It goes from, policing satellites in the sky to underwater cables, to the security arrangements. It's starting to fray a little bit of late, leaving aside the politicians. And Donald Trump's basically, stood up at the UN and said that Britain had a suicidal energy policy. There's a lot of anger about energy prices in the UK that is seeing off American outward business investment. And then tonight we hear that intelligence sharing is under strain because British Keir Starmer's lefty lawyer mates have decreed that what's happening in the Caribbean, where Donald Trump is literally bombing fentanyl smugglers, is illegal under international law. None of that's particularly helpful, right?
No, it's really not helpful. At the same time, I think when you're forced to say something, that's what you end up saying, right? This is a man that has to answer again to those who elected him. Elections, happen for a reason, and there's a reason people are popular or unpopular, and there's a reason people don't last very long in the position that he's in, at least recently. So I think for him, he knows that he has to kind of lean into at least publicly saying that everything Donald Trump is doing is wrong. Although I'm not seeing him go as hard against him on this BBC thing, which I think is interesting. But in general, I think most foreign leaders, at least majority of the world, knows that when they are stuck and having their own internal crisis, they can always rely on distracting people by bringing up Donald Trump's name.
Elizabeth, stay there. I'm going to bring back again Katie Balls from the Times of London. Katie, we've discussed before that sort of strange relationship between Trump and Keir Starmer, and the other European leaders have all sort of seemed to have got their act together this time round in order to try to sort of Trump whisper in a way, all turning up with nice gifts and letters and having their Oval TV moments sort of rehearsed in advance. But it is starting to fray a little bit, is it? There are more and more stories now, not least an incredibly punchy intervention by the US ambassador in Britain on energy prices last week. This intelligence sharing stuff this week. Are we going to see the bromance, the transatlantic bromance that bloomed for the last 10 months start to dissipate?
I suspect Donald Trump will still be pretty warm about Keir Starmer. And you saw, for example, today at the Caroline Leavitt's media briefing, the BBC came up and it was framed much more the answer around the problems with the BBC rather than associating it with the British government too much.
Even though we all pay for it, yeah.
Exactly, and some go to jail for not paying it. But I think that, in terms of that relationship, certainly, Donald Trump likes people who are winners. He liked that Keir Starmer was a winner.
He likes strong men as well, right?
He likes strong men. He likes leaders of countries which don't always have elections and thinks they're strong for that reason. We have a whole range, when it comes to the men he likes. But certainly, when it comes to fellow democracies, he likes those who can win elections and have strong mandates. And that's one of the things he likes about Keir Starmer. I don't think the current political situation, we don't know how much attention Donald Trump is paying to it, helps to that. And I think that when it comes to things like the energy deal, when it comes to where figures in the administration think they can take the UK-US economic relationship, they are frustrated by the fact you have Ed Miliband, keeping the net zero dream alive. And when they think, this is really simple, why don't you listen to us on how you could increase, cheapen your energy and therefore get more. And I think this is why actually another thing that's quite important here is who is picked as the next ambassador here in Washington, D.C. We know that the contest is continuing. You were the first, Harry, to report Varun Chandra as the favourite. It could still be a career diplomat. Some people think the list is a bit low-powered. But the thing about Varun Chandra, at least, is he is someone the administration likes. And I think that, this government can't really risk at the moment.
Another Peter Mandelson.
Or just a completely new candidate, but they just do not know how it's going to land, given there are already tensions on that trade deal and where it goes next.
Katie, just on, we talked about it at length all week, obviously, but on that BBC fandango with the editing, it's obviously cost the Director General, the CEO of BBC News, their jobs. Friday, 5 o'clock, the deadline for a grovelling apology. I suspect we're going to see that, aren't we? I mean, what options really does the BBC have, given they've already admitted kind of bad faith in the fact that they said they got it badly wrong? They're going to have to grovel, right?
I think the fact you have the chairman saying that the specific example, obviously it was a wider dossier of BBC problems, but what Donald Trump is paying attention to is that panorama mixed editing of a speech. And the fact that the BBC themselves have said that it gave a misleading impression, suggested made it seem as though the president was inciting direct violence when he wasn't, does make you think it's not too much further a step to do, an effusive apology, particularly with the risk of a lawsuit, which we've seen Donald Trump, particularly in the second term, use these lawsuits against American broadcasters, media companies, to have his voice heard. And often they're settled, but he will keep going. And it's not clear to me the BBC really wants to keep going with that fight.
Elizabeth Pimcoe, I mean, will a grovelling apology be enough, or do you reckon they're going to have to get their checkbook out? Well, the British public's checkbook out. You know, they licensed fee payers are the ones that are going to be stung here. Do you think the White House and Donald Trump understands that this isn't just your average media company? Actually, he'll be stinging hard-working Brits.
I'm sure he does understand. Look, it depends just how much of an apology is given, right? It depends on the depth of the groveling. So we will have to see. I'm waiting on the edge of my seat for Friday. I'm curious to see what happens. I have been on the BBC quite a few times. They haven't treated me very fairly myself. So I would say that I'm a little biased on the subject, but I am curious to see what happens. And I do think he's definitely owed an apology at minimum, but mostly so are the viewers, because I think it's a little much at this point. We've been watching the Donald Trump show for 10 years. At this point, people have an opinion. There's no need to edit and try to sway anybody in one way or the other.
I mean, in terms of the BBC, obviously it has a unique position in Britain because of its charter and because of the fact it is publicly funded. How, straying into the politics, Elizabeth, does it reflect badly on Britain as a whole when you've got the White House literally going for what is essentially a sort of long arm of the state?
Well, unfortunately, I think the entire world is kind of as polarized as we are over here. So it depends who you ask. I would say that it does, but again, people are going to choose a side based on how they feel about Donald Trump and based on how they personally feel about the BBC. I think if you watch this network every day and you like the things that they say and the way they talk about him, you would think that he was 100% wrong. And if you hate everything they say and you hate watch it every day and you support Donald Trump, you're going to say they better grovel their butts off or expect to pay up. But I mean, again, the entire world has made up their mind about Donald Trump. So this entire editing fiasco is absolutely ridiculous.
Katie, final question. I mean, is there going to be much kickback for the BBC domestically in terms of the government can't be, they came out and said what a shining city on the hill and great light it is, but behind the scenes, it is a bit of a diplomatic headache to have, the president taking to Truth Social to basically say, hey, we're meant to be allies.
Yeah, it is, and it's another example of how, despite having a good personal relationship, there's clearly things that are going to strain UK-US. I think here the UK government's trying to be quite careful in terms of how much they really say on it. Yeah. They don't want to look as though they're taking the BBC's side, but they also don't want to be on the ire of BBC supporters and look like they're being sycophantic.
All right, Katie Ball's still staying with us. Elizabeth Pipcoe, thank you for joining us. Come back and see us soon. After the break, what the world needs now. Another Kennedy Nepo baby. Don't go anywhere, you won't want to miss that. Welcome back to Harry Cole Saves the West. A shout out to our viewers on YouTube who've been taking part in a poll this evening, and the results are in, and it's North Korean levels of support for Donald Trump versus Keir Starmer on who viewers of Harry Cole Save the West prefer. And the result is Donald Trump 100%, Keir Starmer 0. Still with me is the Times of London's Katie Balls, and joining us is commentator Chloe Trapanato. Did I get it right?
Yes, you did.
Yes,
Very
there we go. Right, another name that I'm going to try and not mess up. Jack Schlossberg, social media provocateur, gives politics a try. This kid's never had a job. Never had a real job. He's running around New York with a slick new video. He's running for a seat in Congress, but of course, Chloe, he's a Kennedy. Just what we need, another Nepo baby Kennedy. Is that is there a law in America that we secretly miss that must always be a Kennedy in some position of power?
If I were a Kennedy, I would not go anywhere near public office. Have they not heard of the Kennedy curse? I think it's a terrible idea that he's trying to run again. Even his own mother has said, I do not want my son to run for Congress. I'm afraid for his safety because his father is a Jewish man, and the left does not like Jewish men, especially running for positions of power. So I pray for him. I hope that he's not hurt at all, but even his own mother does not want him to.
What kind of a remarkable scenario, though. We're going to have RFK in the White House as nominally a Dem convert. His nephew in Congress. They've got half the Kennedy family saying, get this guy out of Trump's administration. He's dangerous. And then, RFK becoming sort of a cult hero in America with the Maha movement.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm a little bit upset that he said the things that he did about RFK. RFK's only grandson is seen on social media mocking his grandfather and his voice problem that he has. I think it's quite rude, and I do not think that he's going to do very well in the primaries because he's not being a very serious candidate. He's kind of presenting himself as an unserious, just playboy Nepo baby, like you said, we'll see how he plays and how he fares. But
you're big on the TikTok, I'm told, and so is he. Are we going to start seeing TikTokers in politics?
Yes,
fancy
we are, Harry.
Fancy a tilt at the job.
We're going to see a lot of TikTok in politics, which is very funny because later on our segment is about Chinese spy people, and TikTok is just a spyware gadget for the Chinese, but I do think that a lot of different politicians running for office are going to be using TikTok, and unfortunately the young liberal left has
that's where they get
almost mastered it. Mamdani, that's the whole reason that he won.
Katie, the right playing catch up. I mean, obviously the right had a very powerful voice on social media, and he got shot in the neck not long ago. But it is that sort of is the right playing catch up on the left. It does seem that the progressive side of things have mastered the new media mantras.
I mean, I don't know as much as my fellow panelists, but it does feel a bit to me as though the left has actually been catching up a bit with where the right has got in recent years.
Yeah.
So you look at the Turning Point movement, you referenced the late Charlie Kirk. But, Turning Point, the largest kind of grassroots youth right-wing organisation in America, there is not, to me, a left-wing alternative to that. I went to Turning Point Summit in the summer, met Charlie Kirk there, and, that turnout, you saw the left actually turning up to kind of with their own protest group, being like, we're the rivals to Turning Point. There are about 12 of them, and some of them in dinosaur costumes. It wasn't, it was not the kind of sense of excitement. I walked around this conference, and you spoke to these young kids, and I would say, why are you here? They had Donald Trump Jr. speaking, they had Pete Hegseth, Tulsi Gabbard, Kristen Noem, and they would all say, oh, Charlie Kirk, because we saw a TikTok video. So yes, the movement's lost a really important person, but I think TikTok has already in America brought so many young people to the right. And certainly Nigel Farage, I'll just say briefly, is learning a bit from Charlie Kirk. You knew him. Yeah. And we've seen reform in the UK.
Fireworks at reforms for reform rallies.
Young men on TikTok, that's been a big thing for reform because they've learned from the American right.
Then what about the social media we don't necessarily see? The sort of Maha movement is, the sort of Facebook mums movement. The popularity of Robert F. Kennedy is understated. I've seen a very senior MAGA figure place a large amount of money on Robert Kennedy being on the ticket. Next time round, are we beyond the TikToks and the more the sort of older social media users? Well, dare I say, boomer social media? That is one to watch as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, speak to key figures in the MAGA movement. For example, Steve Bannon, others, Megyn Kelly, influential voices, not in the administration, but seen as important to it. They will say, what was the magic recipe that led to, that decisive election result? And I think Maha was really important for bringing over female voters and also younger voters to a degree, and these granola mums. And lots of people in the UK will say, oh, there's an anti-vax movement, and that's how they define Maha. Now, there is an element of vaccine skepticism in that movement for sure, but there's also a whole other section which is about kind of healthier food.
Is that a granola mum? Is that what we mean?
I'm not a granola
but
mum,
what is,
and
but
my diet is so far from what it should be for one. But I do think there is the sense of what am I feeding my kids?
Right.
What are the chemicals in the system? And what is Big Pharma doing in these areas, which does fit into the granola mum. Often in slightly more affluent areas, you have these voters who voted for Trump. Who I've spoken to relatives, saying, oh, my mum's a granola mum, or my aunt, and she would never have voted for Trump before Maha.
Yeah. Chloe, I mean, it was young college-educated women who'd lived in New York for less than 5 years that basically got Mandami over the line in the election. We talk a lot about the sort of disengaged young male voter, but it's just as bad as for females. Well, it seems that the boys attacking right, the girls attacking to the left. That's going to be a problem for the Republicans going forward if they're losing half of Generation Z.
Generation Z is currently being run by the white liberal young women of its party, at least in terms of the Democratic side. I think you're absolutely right that it was the young, progressive, liberal, very educated women in New York City that got him over the line. I think it was over 50% of Gen Z views socialism favorably now, so they've got that going for them. The left, they've got a very good view of socialism, and they've also got a lot of young liberal women liking Mamdani and what he stands for. So I do think that with TikTok, Charlie Kirk was very influential in drawing those young men over to the Republican Party and explaining to them why it is that socialism is not the way forward for America. I think we need some sort of female presence on the right now to bring those remaining female voters back over to the conservative
party. I mean, who you can blame? We talked about this last night. It's like, and Ben Shapiro has made this point, J.D. Vance has made this point, if you don't have a stake in society, if you can't get a house, if you can't get a job, if you are saddled with college debts for a degree that's basically worthless because you can't get a job after it, if capitalism isn't giving you what you need, then who can blame the kids for going down the dangerous and well-trodden and disastrous path of socialism?
Right now, the first-time home buyers are over the age of 40 in America, which is really daunting for young people. However, not all is lost. Down in Florida, if you take a look at what they're doing down there, Ron DeSantis was somehow able to lower the interest rates by using these tort reforms. So there are ways to put money back into people's pockets, not just through using government subsidies, like the way the left often wants to do it, but just take a look at Florida. They're doing a really great job of making it so that young people can buy homes sooner. So I think there are ways.
Yeah,
but
and you don't necessarily have a God-given right to live in New York, right?
Right, absolutely. Don't live in New York. Just move down south. You'll be fine.
Let's move on. Story caught my eye today. I like this one. A Chinese-owned trailer park located next to a U.S. military base in Missouri. The very base they fly the B-2 bombers out of, has been taken over by the Chinese. I mean, I can't think what they might be doing there. Katie, House Armed Services Committee saying national security red flag. The Chinese are taking the mickey, aren't they?
Yeah, it's one of those stories you read it and you do wonder if it's the 1st of April, in the sense that it just doesn't quite tally. And of course, you have an administration that talks a really good game on tackling China, but actually has quite a confused China policy. In the sense of, you have your China hawks, but on the one hand, Trump will say, I've had this great meeting with Xi. We obviously had the situation on TikTok where they're trying to change the ownership, but it's not quite yet clear to me how far this administration wants to go.
So, I mean, President Xi and Donald Trump were, grinning all grins and handshakes last week, sort of immediate tariff relief, minerals and so forth. At the same time, in across America, we had the spy balloons a couple of years ago. We've got this, Chinese trailer park next to a nuclear base. In London, there's a massive row over letting the Chinese build their super embassy right next to our financial district, and that could have access to the actual cables that make capitalism work. While the politicians are smiling and, as Katie says, confused, the Chinese are running rings around us, aren't they?
Right. It was just today that Kash Patel came in front of the United people, or the American people, and said, we just had a agreement with the CCP, and now they are banning 13 different chemicals that are being used to create fentanyl.
Yeah.
So it seemed like things were hunky-dory, but then it turns out that just under a mile from that U.S. Whiteman military base, there are trailer parks that are owned by people with CCP ties. Very, very scary. I
mean, Donald Trump, just in 20 seconds, he said that China is the biggest threat facing them, but he doesn't really seem to be doing it. As Katie said, he talks a good game, but still some way to go there, right?
I think so. I think they're very sneaky people. I was reading an article, and the couple that bought this territory that's right next to the base, they are connected to this. His name is Igu or something.
Yeah.
And he was connected to Trump. So I think we have to be careful who is near the president, because these people, they come in years and years ago, and now here they are. It's coming decades later. They're actually not as great as they
We've run out of time, sadly. We could go on for that forever. Chloe, Katie, thank you for joining us tonight. That's all we've got time for. I will see you tomorrow. That was Harry Cole Saves the West. Don't forget to subscribe. See you tomorrow.